you were to look at some of the shows on TV, and I'm thinking of perhaps some of the late night comedians, Johnny Carson and Jimmy Fallon and other people, or other TV shows, you would be inclined to think that it's the strongest, most attractive, loudest, wildest people who are the most influential in this world. And to see, when you look around at the world, and those who seem to be influential in it and in control of it, they seem to be sometimes the richest, most brutal or cruelest people that there are. Apparently so. Yet I've been reading a book this week, which written by Susan Cain, a New York Times bestseller, and the title is Quiet. It was written in 2012 and it's had quite an impact from the very moment of its publication. And she's spoken, I don't know if you've heard of the TED lectures, but she gave one of those, and it became, of the 1,300 TED lectures that there are, within this short space, within a month or something of her giving that lecture, she was in the top 10 of people who had ever given that, and it's continued to spread. So it's had a very strong impact, and you don't even have to buy the book, you can just Google that online, The Power of Introverts. And she says in her book that some of the greatest figures of history have not been the loudest and richest and wildest. And she quotes many people, the head of IBM and many other CEOs of large companies, Marie Curie, Mahatma Gandhi, Albert Einstein, and a whole range of people through the book that she says have been very influential in the world, and yet they were all introverts, that they tended to be thoughtful, didn't particularly like crowds, preferred to work with smaller groups of people. So on Palm Sunday, the day of the triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, it struck me that there's a strange sort of overlap between the things that she's writing about. Because Jesus didn't seek to be a superstar, even though the movie has that name, right? There's a little group going to go down to Providence to see it, Jesus Christ Superstar. But he never sought to be a superstar himself. We read also that he rose up very early each morning to pray. So to be very early was to be alone with God. I know that thinking and spiritual contemplation are not the same thing. They are different, and yet it has a certain resonance between the two. We know that he prayed deeply at key moments of his life, the choosing of the apostles, for example, Gethsemane, as we heard up there, all the key moments we have, especially in Luke's Gospel, Jesus at prayer. Many of his parables and the things he said weren't kind of press releases. He didn't kind of create a scene where he could be standing at the front and making a declaration of some kind at some famous monument. But they were, or the words of an actor or a demagogue, like Hitler, say. But he point blank refused to be made a king, and he refused to lead an armed rebellion. So he's different from the leaders of the world, those outspoken leaders of the world. But often what he said, if you think of like his meeting with Nicodemus that we had in the Gospel 1 or 2 Sundays ago, his words there about that God loved the world and that we need to be born again come in response to a question from Nicodemus. And that is often the case. Peter will ask him something, or the woman at the well will. It was in discussion with the woman at the well. So they're deeply thoughtful discourses and actions in response to another person. They're not showpieces and stage pieces. And he had in his responses, for instance, this one today that we have, the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, The Jews did expect the Messiah to be coming, but they didn't expect the Messiah to be coming like that. But he knows about this verse in Zechariah, where the Messiah comes on riding on the foal of a donkey, a colt. So Jesus has this profound knowledge of the Scriptures, and often in his responses to questions, it reflects a deep, deep knowledge and familiarity with the Hebrew Scriptures from hours of reflection and study. So here he comes, not like our kings. If you can imagine the start of the United Nations, and imagine all their different leaders of the nations coming in, riding on donkeys into the General Assembly. It would be a joke. You would not expect to see that, would you? No, and they would not do it. They might ride on war horses or something, but not on what is potentially a stubborn and badly behaved donkey. Donkeys do not always go where you would like them to go. So for Jesus to have come in to fulfill this prophecy of the Messiah coming up to the east gates of Jerusalem, but for him to ride, to use it in that frame, Zechariah 9 verse 9, your Messiah comes to you riding upon the foal of a donkey, upon a colt, shows not only his humility of Jesus Christ, but it also reflects God's control over nature, which you find throughout the Gospel of Mark. For example, the feeding of the 5,000, the calming of the storm, the walking on the water, miraculous healing of people, and the raising up of somebody from the dead, and the restoring of sight to a person born blind. We have throughout Mark's Gospel God's control over nature, and it's also in this scene. So we have Jesus coming as the Messiah in this scene. We have him coming in humility. We have him coming in just as he did in the temptation, in obedience to God, in trust in God, in loyalty to God, and not seeking his own agenda here in the triumphant entry. All the way through to the end, his obedience to God. And he calls us to follow him in that way, to be following God in Jesus Christ, empowered by the Holy Spirit, in obedience, in trust, and in loyalty. And as it says in the reading from Isaiah, for us to have a listening ear, an ear that knows how to listen to what God is teaching us. So we go into Holy Week, let that be a new kind of depth in my life and your life. A life that is obedient, a life that is trusting of God, a life that is loyal to God and listening to God from all the way to the end. In the name of Christ, Amen.